America is heading to the polls, choosing the nation's president. Will it be Republican Donald Trump in place for a second term in office, or Democratic challenger and former VP Joe Biden? In this Inside the Americas, the campaign and the candidates vying for the country's top job. I'm Jeannie Godula. There has been so much movement in this presidential campaign, it's easy to forget everything that's happened. From mask wars to the COVID cluster at the White House, the shouting match/debate to no second debate at all. There were many bumps along this race to the White House. Our Kathy Clifford has more now on the highs and lows of the campaign.
On August 27th, the US president gave his acceptance speech as the Republican nominee in front of the White House, a political use of the presidential office which was unprecedented in US history. But Donald Trump has never been one to follow the crowds. He declared himself a candidate for re-election exceptionally early, kicking off in Orlando in June 2019, where he began a campaign as divisive as his last one.
A vote for any Democrat in 2020 is a vote for the rise of radical socialism and the destruction of the American dream.
However, it was a moderate Democrat who went on to win the primaries. Joe Biden got off to a bad start at the beginning of the race, but defied expectations in March 2020. He overtook left-wing Senator Bernie Sanders and called for Democrats to band together.
We share a common goal, and together we'll defeat Donald Trump.
Despite his overall positive economic record, the current president is now considered responsible for the health crisis by his opponents, though he prefers to minimize it and hardly ever wears a mask. His first campaign rally in Tulsa failed to gather major crowds, but Trump continued to hold rallies at the risk of spreading the virus, repeatedly announcing that a vaccine would soon be ready, and even suggesting some of his own experimental and rather dangerous ideas.
And then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning?
Trump continues to take the virus lightly, despite catching it himself and being hospitalized at the start of October. A week later, he was back in the race, frantically trying to catch up on his lag in the polls, sometimes squeezing 2 or 3 appointments in the same day. During his 2 debates with Donald Trump, the first of which was perhaps the most agitated in the country's history.
Various other places.
True.
He
My
made a
son,
fortune.
my son,
and he didn't have a job.
my son.
Joe Biden saw his opponent's health record as his greatest asset.
He says that we're learning to live with it. People are learning to die with it.
During Biden's rare appearances, he wears a mask and respects social distancing. He's long opted for a largely virtual campaign, often putting running mate Kamala Harris center stage in his place.
Doug Herbert joins me on the set now to take a closer look at the key moments of this campaign. It has been a doozy. One of the key moments we didn't see in that package was the rapid nomination and the swearing in of a new Supreme Court justice. Now, what kind of effect might that have on voters?
Well, it's already having an effect. We already saw, and this was before Amy Coney Barrett actually took her seat on the Supreme Court. They basically forbid the state of Wisconsin from counting any mail-in ballots that are received after November 3rd, after Election Day. That's a big deal because to Democrats and to civic rights groups, that effectively amounts to voter suppression. Of course, the Supreme Court doesn't cast it that way. They say they just want to prevent fraud and they want to make it very equitable, the whole election. And we've also just seen the state Supreme Court in Texas basically limit the number of drop-in boxes to drop your ballot in to 1 per county. Some counties have millions of people in Texas. The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump has hardly tried to conceal the fact he really wanted Amy Coney Barrett on that court as quickly as possible. Why? Because if it does get to the Supreme Court, if it's a contested vote, if Donald Trump and the Republicans contest it, it gets litigious and it gets up there, they want to make sure that they have a solid conservative majority, that extra ultra-conservative vote in their favor. Why? Because he's counting on Amy Coney Barrett basically to take the strictest interpretation possible of what votes should be counted, i.e., counting as few of those mail-in ballots as possible, going towards the strict minimum. He's jubilant right now that she is on that court. This is what he wanted. He got there in time. She did not get a single vote, I'll just note, in her confirmation from a single vote from the opposition party. The first time in 150 years that a new Supreme Court justice has not had one single vote from the opposition.
Doug, you mentioned it briefly before. This election has been marked by a record number of early voters. What's been driving this unprecedented turnout?
Well, it depends who you ask. You're asking me. So the things are COVID, obviously. It's still raging. More than 75,000 cases in the past few days in the just yesterday in the United States. Record numbers of new infections coming. But you also have people just simply not wanting to all have to go to the polls on November 3rd, on Election Day itself. They want to avoid that crush amid a pandemic, which is understandable. But perhaps looming large above all of it is the sheer passions of this election. People are motivated to vote. You hear everywhere you go in the U.S. right now, vote, 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 vote. Now, they don't say vote Biden, vote Trump, but people are charged up. They are emotionally right now on sort of a high, and everyone is going out and voting. We've already seen about half, a little bit more than half of all the voters who voted in 2016 vote with a week to go already at this stage, early voting. It's unbelievable.
How big a part is the pandemic playing in all of this? Is that the only issue in voters' minds?
It's a giant issue, and Donald Trump is absolutely furious that it's such a big issue for all the reasons I just said, because COVID is a pandemic that is raging. If anything, it is getting even a firmer toehold right now in the United States, getting worse by the day, not better, especially in some of the very red states in the West and the Midwest of the United States. Donald Trump recently repeated the word COVID 11 times at a rally, and he was doing so to sort of express his anger at the fact, as he sees it, that's all the journalists talk about. It's all the press can talk about. Well, they're talking about it, Jeannie, because it is the dominant issue and the number one issue on the mind of many Americans, many of whom feel that Donald Trump has not just mismanaged, but he has catastrophically bungled his handling of this pandemic, getting out of the hospital, hitting the campaign trail, unmasked again, holding rallies with other people in crowds, packed crowds, not masked, not social distancing. His vice president doing the same after people in his inner team also getting COVID, back out on the campaign trail. So it's basically right now an issue that voters are going to have foremost in their minds when they head to the polls on November 3rd, and presumably the ones who've already voted, the 70 million plus who've already voted.
Doug, stay with me. I'm going to come back to you in just a minute. For now, though, we're going to take a look at the two men racing for the White House who, as you know, could not be more different in both substance and in style. On the one hand, the Democrat Joe Biden, a career politician, former vice president. On the other, Republican Donald Trump, whose first elected position is right now as U.S. president. Inside the Americas took a closer look.
No matter who wins, the next US president will be the oldest ever elected. Born on June 14, 1946, in a wealthy New York neighborhood, Trump took over his father's business in real estate after his studies. In the 1980s, his name, inscribed on skyscrapers, became synonymous with financial success, though today various scandals have tarnished that shiny image. Joe Biden was born on November 20th, 1942, to a modest family in Pennsylvania. He studied in Delaware, where he was elected senator in 1972. He stayed in this post until his election as vice president to Barack Obama in 2008. Donald Trump was never elected before reaching the White House. The reality show he hosted, The Apprentice, was the main reason for his popularity. He's been married 3 times and has 5 children. Joe Biden remarried in 1977 after the death of his first wife and their daughter in a car accident. He lost another of his sons and is the father of 2 other children. The Democratic candidate likes to attend baseball and American football games and plays online chess. The current president prefers watching television, especially Fox News. His other main passion, golf. Spending 280 days on golf courses since the start of his mandate, he racked up a bill of more than $140 billion for taxpayers.
Doug, we are now in the home stretch of this election, which many people say could be the most fateful in U.S. history. If you had to go out on a limb, who would you say is going to win?
No, I knew you were going to ask me that question, Judy. Trident, a bump. No, seriously, look, it depends on whether you trust the polls. I personally do see a lot more sophistication in the polls this time than in 2016. And let's not forget, the polls got a really bad rap in 2016. And in some cases, rightfully so. But they did predict Hillary Clinton winning by a large margin, which she did in the popular vote. So they weren't totally off. Since then, the pollsters have become more sophisticated. They become more intelligent in the way they target people, the types of questions they ask, and notably putting a lot more weight on a group that they didn't totally ignore, but they underestimated in the last election. And that is the groups in the swing states of white voters without a college degree. That is a big demographic that helped swing it for Donald Trump across the Rust Belt. This time, the polls have been much more conservative. They've made fewer assumptions, perhaps, that they did back in 2016. And they haven't really varied that much. Joe Biden has had quite a lead in the national polls and a slightly thinner lead in the so-called battleground states. So if you believe the polls, it is going to be a Biden victory. But I'll just end by saying this. We're talking about the United States with the quirks of American voters, with the, I have to say it, voter suppression. It is a giant issue in this campaign. How much will mail-in ballots be prevented from being all counted by, as we were saying, perhaps the Supreme Court, perhaps by other courts? And also, at the end of the day, I'm sorry, the Electoral College, perhaps one of the most unjust systems, which a majority of Americans think should be abolished, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because that would take 2/3 in both houses of Congress or a constitutional convention called by state legislatures, a lot of them controlled by Republicans. Electoral College is here to stay as long as it is. I can't give you a firm answer on who's going to win, but I think a lot of nail biting is going to be going on election.
So just very briefly before you go, Doug, let's say that Donald Trump were to lose. How far would he go in trying to contest that result?
Very briefly. First of all, Donald Trump has indicated, we know, I don't even have to answer this, this is not a guesstimate. He is going to contest the election if there's anything short of an absolute dramatic landslide victory for Joe Biden. And guess what? Even if Joe Biden were to have a total landslide victory, I wouldn't rule out Donald Trump trying to contest this election. Just from the things he has said himself and his allies have said. He could hunker down. You could have an unprecedented situation where you have rival groups of electors, pro-Trump, pro-Biden, showing up for the certification of the vote on January 5th in Congress. That would be absolutely unprecedented. Could he hunker down in the White House? Could it come down to federal marshals having to drag him out of the White House? Yes, in a movie scenario, I don't think it will be that. But this is going to be an election where I'll literally watch this space. I'll be surprised if we have a result on election night.
All right, only time will tell. Doug, thank you so much for that. That's France 24's Doug Herbert. Thanks to you for watching. Don't forget, you can keep sending your election questions to me at Jeannie Godula, and stay tuned for our continuing France 24 coverage of the U.S. presidential election.